You're not aggressive enough for this industry. My name is Derek Sullivan. I'm 49 years old and spent 13 years building the procurement department at Ridgemont Industrial in Denver, Colorado. When Charlene Beck walked into my office that Wednesday morning with a folder full of supplier quotes for substandard hydraulic components, I knew something had shifted in ways I didn't like. "These components don't meet our safety specifications," I told her, sliding the documents back across my desk. "The tensile strength is 35% below what our engineers require." Charlene adjusted her glasses and gave me that look she'd been perfecting since becoming our new CEO 3 months earlier. "Derek, we need to think differently about procurement. Our margins are suffering because you're over-engineering everything." I'd been hearing this conversation for weeks, ever since Charlene took over from Ted Blackwood, who'd built Ridgemont into a respected manufacturer of mining equipment. The pressure to cut costs had become relentless. "These components go into our excavators," I said. "If they fail, people die." She leaned back in her chair, studying me like I was a problem to solve. "Brooke will be joining us next week. She has some fresh perspectives on supply chain optimization." Brooke, Charlene's friend's daughter, straight out of business school with an MBA and zero real-world experience. I'd heard about her through the office network. Young, ambitious, and eager to prove herself by implementing aggressive cost-cutting strategies. "I've been doing this job for 13 years, I said carefully. "I know our suppliers, our quality standards, and what our customers expect." "That's exactly the problem." Charlene stood up, smoothing her skirt. "You know the old way of doing things. This industry is changing, Derek. Companies that don't adapt get left behind." She left my office without another word. The message was clear. If you like stories about greed and how real expertise can beat people who dismiss experience, please like this video and subscribe to the channel right now. Every day there are completely new stories about justice and smart revenge. I sat there for a long time after she was gone, looking at the supplier quotes scattered across my desk. Every instinct I'd developed over 13 years told me we were headed for trouble. The materials Charlene wanted to approve were cheap, but they were cheap for a reason. That evening, I called my wife Karen from my truck in the parking lot. "Something's coming," I told her. "I can feel it." I'd started at Ridgemont right out of the military, where I'd learned that cutting corners on equipment specifications wasn't just bad business, it was deadly. Ted Blackwood hired me because he valued that mindset. "I want someone who understands that our reputation depends on building things that last," he told me during my interview. Over the years, I'd built relationships with suppliers who shared that philosophy. Companies like Titan Forge Industries and Apex Components, family-owned businesses that took pride in their work. We paid fair prices for quality materials, and in return, they gave us components that exceeded specifications. Our excavators were known throughout the Rocky Mountain region for their reliability. My son Tyler had just started his sophomore year at Colorado School of Mines, studying engineering. He'd grown up hearing me talk about safety standards and quality control. "Dad always says that corners you cut today will cut you tomorrow," he'd joke when his friends complained about his attention to detail. But Charlene Beck came from a different world. She'd worked for consulting firms and private equity companies, places where success was measured in quarterly earnings reports rather than decades of accident-free operations. When the board brought her in to modernize Ridgemont after Ted's retirement, I'd hoped she'd understand what made our company special. The warning signs had been subtle at first. Emails about procurement efficiency opportunities, requests for detailed cost breakdowns on every supplier contract, questions about whether we really needed to inspect every shipment when our suppliers had proven track records. Then Brooke showed up, 24 years old, eager and armed with spreadsheets that showed how much money we could save by switching to cheaper suppliers. She attended every procurement meeting, taking notes and asking pointed questions about our supplier relationships. "Derek," she said during one particularly tense meeting, "have you considered that your emotional attachment to these suppliers might be affecting your judgment?" Emotional attachment. That's what she called 13 years of building trust with companies that had never delivered a defective component. I started keeping copies of all my correspondence with Charlene and Brooke. Something told me I might need documentation of my objections to their proposed changes. Karen noticed I was staying late more often, double-checking orders and reviewing quality reports. "You're worried about something," she said one evening. "They're going to fire me," I told her. "They just haven't figured out how yet." The end came on a Friday morning in November. Charlene called me into her office with Brooke sitting beside her, both of them wearing expressions I'd seen before, the look of people who'd already made a decision. "Derek, we've decided to restructure the procurement department," Charlene began. "Brooke will be taking over your responsibilities effective immediately." I sat there for a moment, processing what I'd just heard. 13 years of service, and they were handing my job to someone who'd been with the company for exactly 4 weeks. "May I ask why?" I said. Brooke leaned forward, consulting her tablet. "Your procurement practices are 42% more expensive than industry benchmarks. We've identified significant cost-saving opportunities that you've been resistant to implementing. Those cost savings come from using materials that don't meet our safety specifications." Charlene waved her hand dismissively. "Derek, you're stuck in an outdated mindset. Modern manufacturing requires aggressive cost management. You're simply not aggressive enough for this industry." I thought about the crane that had collapsed in Seattle 2 years earlier because someone used substandard bolts to save $40 per unit. 3 workers died. But Charlene and Brooke weren't thinking about Seattle. They were thinking about their next quarterly report. "I understand," I said quietly. They seemed surprised by my calm response. Brooke had probably expected me to argue or make a scene. Instead, I stood up and extended my hand to Charlene. "Thank you for the lesson," I said. She shook my hand, looking confused. "The lesson? You've taught me something important about the difference between cost and value." I cleaned out my office that afternoon while the rest of the department watched in stunned silence. Tommy Rodriguez from shipping helped me carry my boxes to the truck. "This is wrong, Derek," he said. "Everyone knows it. Sometimes wrong is just the first step towards something right," I told him. That weekend, I sat in my garage going through 13 years of supplier contacts, quality reports, and industry relationships. I had something Charlene and Brooke didn't understand. Not just knowledge, but trust. The kind of trust that comes from always doing the right thing, even when it costs more. I called Jake Morrison at Titan Forge Industries on Monday morning. "Derek, I heard what happened at Ridgemont," he said. "Charlene Beck called here last week demanding we cut our prices by 25% or lose the contract." "What did you tell her?" "I told her our prices reflect our quality. If Ridgemont wants cheaper steel, they'll have to find someone else to provide it." That's when I knew exactly what I was going to do. Starting a company at 49 wasn't something I'd ever planned, but neither was watching Charlene Beck destroy everything Ted Blackwood had built. I spent the first month after my termination researching business licenses, consulting with lawyers, and reaching out to the suppliers who'd been dropped by Ridgemont's new aggressive procurement strategy. The response surprised me. Jake Morrison at Titan Forge wasn't just interested in working with my new company, he wanted to invest in it. "You understand quality, Derek," he said over coffee at a diner in southeast Denver. "There's a market for companies that still believe in doing things right." Within 6 weeks, I'd incorporated Superior Materials Corporation and secured initial funding from 4 suppliers who'd grown tired of competing in the race to the bottom. Our business model was simple: develop and source superior materials for manufacturers who valued safety and reliability over short-term cost savings. Meanwhile, Ridgemont's new procurement strategy was beginning to show results, just not the ones Charlene had expected. Tyler called me from college in early March. "Dad, did you see the news about Ridgemont?" I hadn't, but a quick internet search revealed the headline, "Ridgemont Industrial Issues Voluntary Recall of Model R Series Excavators." The article mentioned potential component failures and an abundance of caution regarding operator safety. I knew exactly which components had failed: the hydraulic fittings Brooke had sourced from a discount supplier in Tennessee, the same ones I'd rejected for failing to meet pressure specifications. The recall would cost Ridgemont approximately $3.2 million, not counting the damage to their reputation. Charlene called me the next day. "Derek, I know we had our differences, but I was wondering if you might consider consulting for us on this recall situation." The irony wasn't lost on me. "I'm afraid I'm not available for consulting, Charlene. I'm too busy building my own company." "Your own company?" Her voice carried a mixture of surprise and skepticism. "Derek, starting a manufacturing business requires significant capital and industry relationships. Are you sure you're prepared for that kind of challenge?" "I appreciate your concern," I said, "but I think I'll manage." What Charlene didn't know was that Superior Materials had already secured contracts with 4 of Ridgemont's former customers' companies that had grown concerned about Ridgemont's quality issues and were looking for alternatives. Word travels fast in the construction equipment industry, especially when it involves safety problems. By spring, we'd moved out of my garage and into a small facility in Lakewood. I hired Tommy Rodriguez from Ridgemont's shipping department as our first employee, followed by 2 quality control specialists who'd been laid off when Charlene eliminated Ridgemont's inspection team to cut costs. The real breakthrough came when we developed a new steel alloy that exceeded industry strength requirements while remaining cost competitive with standard materials. Our metallurgist, Dr. Angela Foster, a brilliant woman I'd met through Jake Morrison, had been working on the formula for years at her previous job. This alloy could revolutionize construction equipment manufacturing, she explained during her presentation to our board. It's 40% stronger than current industry standards, but the production cost is only 18% higher. Within months, we had equipment manufacturers calling us instead of the other way around. Companies like Cascade Construction and Northwest Heavy Industries were eager to differentiate their products with superior materials. Meanwhile, Ridgemont continued to struggle. Their second recall came in July: defective bearing assemblies that Brooke had sourced from an overseas supplier with questionable quality control. The third recall followed in September. I didn't take pleasure in Ridgemont's problems, but I couldn't help feeling vindicated. Every recall, every customer complaint, every safety investigation proved that the outdated mindset Charlene had criticized was actually the foundation of sustainable business practice. But that's when things really started to change. By October, Superior Materials had grown to 28 employees and occupied 3 buildings in our expanded facility. We'd developed relationships with manufacturers across the western United States, all of them drawn by our reputation for uncompromising quality. That's when I learned Ridgemont was in serious financial trouble. The call came from an unexpected source: Ted Blackwood himself, the founder Charlene had effectively pushed into retirement. He'd heard about Superior Materials through industry contacts and wanted to meet for lunch. "Derek, I owe you an apology," he said as we sat in the same restaurant where he'd offered me my first promotion 10 years earlier. "I should have fought harder when the board brought in Charlene. I knew she didn't understand our business. You were ready to retire, Ted. You deserve to enjoy it without fighting corporate politics." He shook his head. "I fought corporate politics for 30 years building that company. I should have fought a little longer to protect it." He paused, studying his coffee. "Charlene's been calling me. Ridgemont's in trouble. Real trouble." The details he shared were worse than I'd imagined. The recalls had triggered multiple lawsuits from customers whose equipment had failed. Insurance companies were refusing to renew Ridgemont's liability coverage. 3 major contracts had been canceled due to safety concerns. "But there's something else," Ted continued. "Something Charlene doesn't know yet. The financial audit I requested before selling my shares is about to become public. It shows that Brooke's procurement decisions have created liability exposure of approximately $73 million more than Ridgemont's annual revenue of $68 million. The board is planning to file for bankruptcy protection," he said quietly. "They're hoping to restructure their debts and start over with new management." I sat back, absorbing the magnitude of Ridgemont's collapse. "What about the employees?" "That's why I'm talking to you, Derek. There's going to be an asset sale. The facilities, the equipment, the customer contracts, everything will go to the highest bidder." He met my eyes across the table. Superior Materials could submit a bid. The idea had never occurred to me. When I'd started my company, I'd been focused on building something new, not acquiring something broken. But Ted was right. Ridgemont's assets could accelerate Superior Materials' growth by decades. "Do you really think we're ready for that kind of expansion?" "I think you understand Ridgemont's true value better than anyone," he said. "You know which customers to keep, which suppliers to trust, which employees are worth retaining. Most importantly, you understand what made Ridgemont successful before Charlene tried to fix what wasn't broken." That evening, I called an emergency board meeting with Jake Morrison and our other investors. When I explained the situation, their response was unanimous. Superior Materials should prepare a bid for Ridgemont's assets. "It's poetic justice," Jake said. "You get fired for refusing to compromise on quality, and now quality is going to save the company that fired you." Over the next few weeks, we worked with attorneys and financial advisors to structure our bid. The process revealed the full scope of Ridgemont's mismanagement. Charlene's aggressive cost-cutting had alienated their best suppliers. Their quality problems had driven away their most valuable customers. And Brooke's inexperience had created legal liabilities that would take years to resolve. But underneath all that damage was the company Ted Blackwood had built. Solid customer relationships, valuable contracts, and skilled employees who'd been forced to implement policies they knew were wrong. "We're not just buying assets," I told Karen one evening as we reviewed the bid documents. "We're rescuing a company from people who never understood what made it valuable." The bankruptcy auction was scheduled for December 10th at the federal courthouse in downtown Denver. Superior Materials had submitted our bid 3 days earlier, $58 million for Ridgemont's complete asset package, including facilities, equipment, customer contracts, and intellectual property. Our bid wasn't the highest. Meridian Capital, a private equity firm, had offered $64 million. But our bid included something theirs didn't: a commitment to retain Ridgemont's existing workforce and honor all customer warranties. "The court will consider more than just the dollar amount," our attorney explained. They want to see bids that preserve jobs and maintain business continuity. What the court didn't know, what no one except Ted and I knew, was that Superior Materials had already secured agreements with Ridgemont's 3 largest customers to continue their contracts under new management. We'd also arranged temporary employment agreements with 15 key Ridgemont employees, including Tommy and 2 of the quality control specialists I'd worked with for years. Charlene had no idea any of this was happening. According to Ted, she'd been focused on finding a new job, confident that the bankruptcy would be handled by attorneys and accountants while she moved on to her next opportunity. She was about to discover how wrong she was. The auction took place in a small courtroom packed with lawyers, accountants, and representatives from the bidding companies. Charlene sat in the front row with Brooke beside her, both looking uncomfortable in a process they clearly didn't understand. When the judge called for final presentations, Meridian Capital went first. Their representative, a sharp-dressed woman in her 30s, outlined their plans to strip Ridgemont's assets, sell the real estate, and liquidate the inventory. This approach maximizes recovery for creditors and eliminates ongoing operational risks, she explained. I stood up when our turn came, holding a folder containing letters from Ridgemont's employees, customers, and suppliers. Your Honor, Superior Materials Corporation respectfully submits that Ridgemont Industrial represents more than just distressed assets. This company has 40 years of history serving the construction industry. Its employees have decades of experience. Its customers depend on continuing service for equipment they've already purchased. I opened the folder and began reading. Northwest Construction writes, Ridgemont's excavators are the backbone of our fleet. We need assurance that parts and service will continue. Charlene turned in her seat, finally recognizing my voice. Her face went pale as she realized who was presenting the competing bid. Pacific Infrastructure states, we've worked with Ridgemont for 15 years. Their equipment reliability is crucial to our operations. I looked directly at Charlene as I read the next letter. And Titan Forge Industries states, Ridgemont was our largest customer until recent management changes compromised their quality requirements. We would welcome the opportunity to resume our partnership under new leadership. The judge asked several questions about our financing and operational plans. I answered each one with specific details about how Superior Materials would integrate Ridgemont's operations while maintaining our quality standards. When the presentations ended, the judge announced a 30-minute recess to review the bids. Charlene cornered me in the hallway, her composure finally cracking. This is ridiculous, Derek. You were just a procurement manager who couldn't adapt to modern business practices. I was a procurement manager who understood the difference between cost and value, I replied calmly. The court documents show exactly what your modern business practices accomplished. Brooke stood behind Charlene, looking confused and frightened. What court documents? The liability assessment from the recalls, I said. $73 million in potential damages, all traceable to procurement decisions made after I was terminated. Charlene's confident facade collapsed entirely as the implications sank in. The judge returned to the courtroom at exactly 3:00 p.m., his expression revealing nothing as he reviewed the final bid documents. After careful consideration of all factors, including bid amounts, operational continuity, employee retention, and creditor recovery, this court awards the Ridgemont Industrial Asset Package to Superior Materials Corporation. The gavel fell with a sound that seemed to echo through the silent courtroom. Charlene's sharp intake of breath was audible from 3 rows away. I stood to acknowledge the court's decision, keeping my expression neutral despite the satisfaction coursing through me. Our attorney shook my hand, but my attention was focused on Charlene's reaction. She turned in her seat, her face a mixture of shock and rage. This is impossible, she whispered loud enough for me to hear. You can't just, how did you? Congratulations, Mr. Sullivan, the judge said. Superior Materials Corporation is now the owner of all Ridgemont Industrial assets. Transfer documents will be processed within 48 hours. As the courtroom began to empty, Charlene remained frozen in place, still staring at me in disbelief. The woman who'd lectured me about adapting to modern business practices had just watched her former subordinate acquire her company through the bankruptcy she'd caused. I walked past Charlene without a word, but stopped when she called my name. Derek, wait. Her voice had lost all its corporate authority, replaced by something closer to desperation. This doesn't make sense. You were just a procurement manager. How did you finance this? I built relationships with people who value quality over quick profits, I said simply. The same suppliers you alienated invested in Superior Materials because they knew we understood what you never did. Brooke finally found her voice. Derek, what happens to us now? I looked at her for a moment, remembering the eager young woman who'd dismissed my emotional attachment to reliable suppliers. "You'll figure it out, Brooke. You're aggressive enough for this industry, remember?" 3 weeks later, I stood in the renovated facility that now displayed the Superior Materials logo where Ridgemont's sign had hung for 40 years. Tommy was training 2 new quality control inspectors, both of them eager to learn from someone who'd never compromised on safety standards. The first excavator rolling off our production line bore a small plaque that read, "Superior Materials, Quality Without Compromise." Charlene Beck and Brooke faced complete professional ruin when the full scope of their mismanagement became public record through the bankruptcy proceedings. Charlene's career ended permanently when multiple regulatory agencies cited her decisions as direct contributing factors in safety violations that resulted in equipment failures, making her legally unemployable in any manufacturing role requiring safety oversight. The lawsuits from the recalls followed her personally as corporate attorneys successfully argued that her aggressive cost-cutting directives constituted gross negligence that voided her executive protection clauses. Brooke's MBA became worthless when her procurement disasters were studied in business schools nationwide as textbook examples of how inexperience and poor judgment could destroy established companies. Her association with the Ridgemont collapse made her unemployable in procurement or supply chain management. The $73 million in liability exposure they created haunted them both through years of depositions, court appearances, and personal asset seizures as creditors pursued every avenue of recovery. I smiled as I walked through the facility where men and women took pride in building equipment that would never fail the people who depended on it. Understanding that sometimes patience and principle matter more than aggression and ambition. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts about new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.